Ryan Paganetti was a former assistant on the Eagles staff. He helped coach the linebackers, also game management. And that's what's really interesting to me on how the game is changing. And we asked people earlier today, from the Eagles win on Sunday, what is sustainable? What can they continue to do from what we saw in the game on Sunday? Because I think a lot of people were surprised at some of the things. So let's bring Ryan into the conversation. And I know that a lot of people kind of looked at the Eagles, Ryan, as, wow, that was a surprise. So let me start with that. First off, thanks for joining the show. Were you surprised at some of the things you saw from this new-look Eagles team?
I would say the number one thing that was surprising was just how dominant the offensive and defensive lines looked, to the point where it almost looked like Atlanta shouldn't even be on the field with them. I mean, that looked like a South Jersey high school football game when you have a powerhouse playing a team that just doesn't have the guys. And, have all those offensive linemen healthy, all those defensive linemen healthy. There's some talented guys. Some of the younger guys have continued to develop, like Malata and Samalo. So I think it's really promising for them, because at the end of the day, if you can win the line of scrimmage or at least compete at the line of scrimmage, you're going to be involved in every single NFL game. And I think you saw that last year at times where we had guys out there that maybe were a fourth string, and it was just tough because they were losing matchups.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you can kind of give the listeners a little insight on, what your role was with the Eagles and how long you were kind of there and some of the things that you had done. You were a member of that staff that, helped them win a Super Bowl. So obviously you went through the highest of highs and then, some of the lows that the team went through, which we can kind of find out maybe some of the reasons why that happened.
Yeah, so I was with the defense, and I finished there as assistant linebackers coach, but really my main value add was I was helping out Coach Peterson with fourth downs and two-point conversions and all those situations during games. I was up in the booth, sort of giving him insight on, what from an analytics standpoint or a data standpoint would the recommendations be, and he was very receptive to that stuff. And of course, we got a lot of attention the Super Bowl year because we had went for so many fourth downs and we had success. And we also were sort of on the other end of the spectrum this last year where some of the fourth downs didn't work. And so there is some risk reward to that. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I think to some degree, the recipe that we had in 2017 is sort of similar to what's going on now, where you have a young quarterback and you got talented offensive line, talented defensive line. And if the quarterback is playing well, I mean, you have a chance.
Yeah, there's no question that I looked at the parallels from Chip Kelly's first year and Andy's last year. If you remember, Andy's last year, the line was decimated by injuries. Mm-hmm. Chip came here and the line was healthy, and voila, they won 10 games. Do you see a similar situation this year where the line problem last year really affected the game plan?
Oh, absolutely. I would say that fans still don't really appreciate when you have a weak offensive line. Everything on offense is harder. I mean, if you have one guy that's consistently losing matchups, it can kill the run game. If it's a third down and the pass protection, and you have a guy that can't hold up. I mean, defensively, we would look for times to put Fletcher Cox on their weakest offensive lineman and whoever that was. So defenses are looking for those matchups, and right now, I don't see a clear weakness on the offensive line, and I think that's great for them because they're going to hold up. They got the great news. I mean, unfortunately for Dallas with DeMarcus Lawrence injury, but there's a lot of reasons to be very optimistic about the Eagles. And I'd say the other thing that was a little bit underrated from the Andy's last year was they had so many turnovers. And usually from a statistical standpoint, year over year, the turnovers usually bounce back to some degree if you're really near the bottom of the league. And so that was part of the benefit there. But you did see, I think they had virtually all the offensive linemen healthy for Chip's first year. And I think they led the league in rushing, and it was a pretty impressive year.
Ryan Paganetti's with us. He's a former assistant with the – now, did you work under Chip?
Yeah, I was there for Chip's last year, too, so I had an interesting exposure to sort of both situations.
Now, would you say that he was heavier on the analytics than Doug was?
I think he had a different perspective. I think actually both of them were pretty pro analytics. I think Chip had a bigger emphasis when it came to injuries and sports science.
Right.
And Doug, for the in-game decisions, I think he put a little bit more weight on that stuff and then maybe a little bit less on some of the other ones.
All right. So one of the things that, so I'd like to get your kind of perspective on, you just kind of gave it a little bit, was when you're coaching a game, the game planning that goes in based on the health of a unit, like the offensive line, like how that changes things, but also the defensive line. Like you look at the Eagles' defensive front, I would imagine that Jonathan Gannon's game plan is a lot different with those guys than it would be if he had guys hurt, due to injury.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think it's a little bit different defensively because ultimately, like, you might have a certain scheme and you just sort of stick with your scheme, but you'll see particularly on third downs, the defensive coordinators looking to create one-on-one matchups for Javon Hargrave or Fletcher Cox. And I think really Hargrave's, he looked like an all-pro the other day, but for him, I think when he came to our scheme last year, there was a little bit of a learning curve because he was being asked to do different things than what he was done in Pittsburgh. And
Right.
then he had, I think he had a pectoral injury. He had a significant injury in camp, and that sort of set him back a little bit for getting reps and things like that. And then towards the end of the year, he started to sort of show his talent. And then, so far, that was a really impressive performance from him the other day. And if I am the 49ers right now, I'm thinking about, can I even run the ball up the middle against those guys? I don't know. You find out in the first quarter if you have a chance.
Well, it's funny because what would fans yell last year? I take the calls in every, Schwartz doesn't blitz enough. They don't blitz. But when they blitzed, they didn't have the talent, because of injuries in the back end. So,
Right.
like that balance of where the talent lies to say, I trust my guys to blitz.
Yeah. I think for most defensive coaches that I've been around, they would love the idea of just having an incredibly talented front four where they can just sit there in soft coverage and just let those guys eat. And the defensive backs love it too because they feel like their jobs are so much easier as well. But if you were asking me where I would invest resources first, I personally think that, the talented defensive line is really probably the most important thing from the defensive perspective.
Yeah. Now, you worked with the linebackers, and for years people say, the Eagles don't value linebackers. But it seems like the position is in such flux right now. Where do you see that position in today's NFL?
Well, I think in part because you see so much nickel defense, or even there's like a big nickel scheme that's becoming really popular where teams are putting 3 safeties on the field, but they end up with 2 linebackers. And it's really sort of a response to just doing whatever you can to slow down the pass game. And because of that, even with the formations and the looks and the motions that you get with these offenses, you're looking at your linebackers have to be able to cover because if they can't, the team you're playing is going to line up an empty. They're going to find a matchup and they're going to kill you. So it's every player that is out there a linebacker. If you cannot cover, it's a tough job. Like the days of like the first and second down thumper who just lights people up and, stops the run game, that you sit there and you get in base defense and the offense says, okay, great, let's throw the ball. So it's really a changing dynamic.
Yeah, it's weird because there's times like last week early, Atlanta's running the ball and you're like, okay, do I sneak TJ Edwards out there? And then as soon as you do that, they go right after TJ Edwards. So it's like that dynamic of how you play that linebacker position. And Singleton seems like a guy they just kind of ran into somehow, who just a hard-working guy who'll give you all the effort in the world. And then Wilson, I guess, is a little bit better than in coverage.
Yeah, Alex was really an impressive guy to me because, he had such an interesting career arc where really guys that end up in the CFL at his age, they don't really make it back into the NFL, but he got a shot and he just brought it every single day, 100 miles an hour, worked so hard. And even this 2 off seasons ago, we were sitting there and I would actually track all these statistical stats from practice. And he was so impressive in practice that we had this leaderboard for statistics, and he actually was so far ahead of everyone else that the other linebackers thought that I had like a side deal with Alex Singleton or something. But his production was through the roof, like twice as many tackles at practice every day as everyone else. And after a while, we started thinking like, this is legit. And then when he got his chance last season, I want to say he was near the top of the league in tackles per game, and it's great to see what he's doing. All
right, so I have so many things I'd like to pick your brain on here. Number one, and I say this because this year I kind of, with the lines, all predicated on the health of the lines. Now, the skill players being so young is such an interesting dynamic here. But last year, many people thought, Vegas had them winning 10 games, right? Mm-hmm. Would you say that the season was not where you thought it would be, number one, based on injury? Would that be the top reason or not necessarily?
I think it was up there, but I'm not the type to just blame one particular aspect. I think there was a few different things going on there. And at the end of the day, from an analytics perspective, our offensive pass game was just not good enough. We were near the bottom in a lot of metrics, and you're just not going to be a successful team, particularly when our organization had invested a lot of resources in receiver and line and quarterback. And the organization wanted to have a very good pass game, and the results were not great. And I think that dynamic and picking out exactly why the pass game wasn't working out is something that could be analyzed to eternity. But so far, it certainly looks like through one game that the passing game is significantly more impressive.
Okay, so then last year through 4 games, they shift to Jalen Hurts. And if you look at the numbers in the play, complete like 58%, not great. But some would say, well, he didn't complete a lot of passes because he was willing to kind of live to fight another day. He comes out this game, and obviously every time you turn the television on, he's on the screen. What is it that you like from what you saw about Jalen maybe last year and then now incorporate it this year?
I think a little bit of last year was sort of misleading in the sense that some of those opportunities he was presented with last year, we were getting blown out. And what that allowed for is these defensive lines to just completely tee off on him or, face tougher coverages. But if your offense is playing well, your defense is playing well, and maybe you're leading or the game is competitive, it's a lot easier as a quarterback to operate as opposed to a situation where the defensive line doesn't even have to worry about the run game and they can just sort of tee off. And I think just at the same time too, that transition from your first year to your second year is usually where you see these players have their biggest jump because they get an entire offseason. They sort of figure out what their weaknesses are and what improvements they can make. And I'm sure Jalen was hearing, okay, my completion rate wasn't great. How can I get this better? And, I think he's developed a great relationship with some of the younger guys. And, what was he at, like 78% in that game? If he keeps that up, he's going to have a great year.
Ryan Paganetti, former Eagles assistant coach, game management, assistant linebacker coach. So you were a linebacker guy. Last year, you didn't do such a good job against George Kittle. He had 15 catches and 15 targets. Yes. So how do you how's the game plan against Kittle this time around?
Well, I think it's tough because they're really creative with all the shifts and motions, and almost every single play there's a lot of things going on in Kyle Shanahan's offense, and he's looking for ways to get that player a good one-on-one matchup. So we might have a plan, okay, we're going to put a safety on him or we're going to have a nickel on him, and next thing you know, they're shifting and motioning and they're sort of catching your defense where you have a bad matchup. But personally for me, he's so impressive, and just given the group that they have at receiver is maybe, they don't have that much depth there, at least the 49ers. I'd be looking for the Eagles to consider putting, maybe put Slay on him on third downs, if it's an obvious pass situation, and just, take the guy out of the game. And I think you saw that a little bit in the last couple of years with teams putting premier corners on Zach Ertz on third down situations. And I think you might see a little bit of that from the Eagles this Sunday.
All right, Ryan Paganetti, the Eagles and the 49ers. I'll leave you with this one. Them getting Steven Nelson, was that like a difference maker in terms of expectation? No one thinks this is a Super Bowl team, but it's almost like you can compete now every week because you have a veteran guy. It seemed like that position was just a rotating door last year.
Yeah, there were some games where I can remember specifically, we're trotting out undrafted rookies against Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, and that was not a fun time. And we were trying to avoid that, but they would get in looks and formations to basically force our hand a little bit. And just sitting up in the booth and knowing exactly what their quarterback's thinking pre-snap, and he's like, oh man, he's got that matchup and he's going to it. We tried everything we could, and to have a little bit of depth there at corner, even just in the case of injuries, is so valuable and critical. And I think that, if the guy does go down, they're well equipped to be able to at least handle a little bit better than last year.
Ryan Paganetti, you can follow him on Twitter at Paganetti Ryan, and he's got great kind of focus on these games and insight, and kind of gives you a little bit of insight that you're not getting watching these games. So give him a follow on Twitter, and hopefully we can have you back on down the road, Ryan.
Great. Thanks for having me.